Hello, everyone, and happy Wednesday. Thank you so much for joining us today. Welcome to this month's webinar, Lessons Learned Fundraising During COVID-19. My name is Christine Kim, and I am the project coordinator for the Fundraising Academy. I will be your moderator today. Before we get started, a couple of notes. This webinar will be conversational with the opportunity to ask questions during, as well as a 30-minute Q&A following the presentation. Please submit any questions you have in the Q&A option within your Zoom control panel. The chat function can also be used during our community share time, where you can share your ideas and all of your case studies with the rest of the attendees. Closed captioning is also available for this webinar. To enable this setting, please click the closed captioning option in your Zoom controls. The caption size can be adjusted in the video settings under accessibility. In the days following the webinar, you will receive an email with a link to access the slide deck and recording to review at your leisure. You've got a cause, learn how to fund it. At Fundraising Academy, Cause Selling Education, we enhance fundraiser skills so they can develop and sustain donor relationships to advance their cause in today's growing giving landscape through a proven contemporary curriculum presented by world-class nonprofit fundraising leaders. We want to recognize our important affiliate partners who provide training and education to fundraisers nationally. Check out the map to find an institute in your community. Now I'm very pleased to introduce today's presenter, Sharyn Goodson, Vice President of Philanthropy for the Leichtag Foundation. Sharyn manages grant-making, philanthropic strategies, and partnerships efforts. Sharyn previously served as the Vice President of Philanthropy at the Jewish Community Foundation of San Diego, managing its philanthropy programs, major family funds, and foundations. Prior to that role, Sharyn was Director of Grants of Jewish Family Service of San Diego and Program Director of the Aspen Community Foundation. Sharyn holds the Certified Fundraising Executive, or CFRE, credential. Welcome, Sharyn, and thank you so much for being here today.
Great, thank you, Christine, and hi, everybody. It's a pleasure to be with you all today. Doing these workshops for the Fundraising Academy is one of my favorite things to do. And looking at COVID over these past 13, 14 months almost has been a great education as well. And I'm looking forward to talking with you about some of the things that we've all learned during this time. I think what we want to start with is just to find out who is with us this afternoon. So we're going to do a poll. If you could tell us about yourself and how many years you have been fundraising. We'll give you a minute to do that.
The poll should be launched on your screen. If you don't see it, please look at the bottom of your Zoom control panel. Thank you, everyone. Looks like we only have a handful of people that still need to vote. Again, the options are 0 to 3 years, you're a new fundraising staff. 4 to 10 years, you're an experienced fundraiser. Over 10 years, you're a fundraising executive or professional, or maybe you're just a volunteer fundraiser and board member attending today. Okay, thank you everyone for your answers. I'll now share the results. Sharyn, can you see them?
I can. Well, we have mostly folks who are pretty new to the field, which is awesome. So 43% of the respondents are new to fundraising, relatively 0 to 3 years, followed by 23%, 4 to 10 years, 30%, 10 plus years. So that's some great wisdom on the call for sure. And then we have a couple of volunteers who are with us. So that's great. Thank you so much for sharing that. So what we're going to do for the next hour and a half or so is really think about COVID in terms of the fundraising lessons that we've all learned. So my work at the Leichtag Foundation involves a lot of capacity building for nonprofits. And over the past almost a year, we've had meetings every Friday morning with fundraising professionals who we call it Fundraising Fridays. And this is a collaboration with our foundation and 2 of our local professional associations, the Association for Fundraising Professionals in San Diego and the North County Philanthropy Council, which is in the north part of San Diego County. And what we've had is this weekly conversation, which is an opportunity for fundraising professionals to connect, to recharge, to ask questions as everybody was starting to do virtual programs and starting to figure out what platforms to use, etc. This weekly Friday conversation became a wonderful haven for everybody at the end of the week. And anyone on this call is more than welcome to join us, no matter where you live. We have had people outside of San Diego join this call. Some of our conversations are focused on what's happening locally, but a lot of them are not. So the lessons that I've compiled for you really come out of these conversations, and conversations that I've also had with other nonprofit professionals, because our foundation also does a lot of technical assistance for grantees as they prepare their grant applications. We help them look for other funding sources. That's a big part of our personality. So in a lot of ways, we're really an operating foundation. And so we give grants, but we also do a lot of programming as well. So I found this quote by Steve Jobs that I thought was really appropriate for this past year plus, where what can we learn from this? And I don't know if a lot of you are having these conversations, but I have been, where people will say, well, we've tried this new method. And the next thing somebody will say is, oh, well, great. Do you think you'll keep doing it after COVID when everything returns back to normal? And so it's kind of got me thinking of that. Sometimes we don't really know where we're going when we're in the midst of something, especially something as crazy as the last year has been with the pandemic. So we can't really connect the dots going forward, but we can when we're looking backwards. And so that's really how we're basing today's conversation. So there are 4 lessons that we have, or 5, I think, sorry. 5 lessons that we have collected for our conversation. The first, we really learned during this time that connections and partnerships are critical. That no longer can we just kind of count on the fact that we're going to bump into somebody at an event or at our office. We have to be a lot more deliberate about this, and a lot more deliberate about connecting with our donors. So that's the second one, is maintaining donor contact no matter what. This last year has really taught us that the organizations that really were involved with their donors from the beginning, really keeping them updated in what was going on and involving them in their conversations, were able to really preserve many of those relationships and count on support. The third lesson is that this case for support is different now. It's a different case than the one that we all had before COVID started, because while the mission of our work has changed, has really stayed the same, the way that nonprofits have gone about this work has really been different. It's had to be. We'll talk about this. The next is these virtual meetings and events are here to stay. That even when we're all able to have in-person events, and I'm starting to see some of these be publicized now, even when this happens, there has been a certain level of productivity and preference, I think also on the side of donors, particularly for meetings. I had one donor tell me, there's not a reason for me to have to drive an hour each way to go to an audit meeting. So I'm in San Diego County, where traffic can be an issue, but it's also a pretty far distance from one place to another, and really can take a lot of time. So, I think just the certain level of productivity that we've all found. And then the last is that planned giving has really had a resurgence over this past year, that we'll talk about the reasons for this and what we're seeing nonprofits do about that. But it's something that if organizations didn't already have a plan giving program, it's something that is valuable to revisit and put into practice. And it doesn't have to be a very complicated plan giving program or one where you need a huge amount of expertise. It's really just having it out there as a source of support for your organization. So let's talk about lesson 1. So connections and partnerships are critical, and we need to work harder at them now and than really ever before. And it's kind of what I said a few minutes ago, in that we really just can't take for granted these spontaneous interactions that we would have, or the spontaneous communications. I know probably a few months into the pandemic, I had a conversation with a colleague, and we had a miscommunication about something. And she said, well, I think why this happened, we were both a little frustrated with each other. So I'll kind of give you the whole picture. She said, I think what's going on here is that we're not really talking other than email or text, or when we're in a meeting and we're trying to get something done. And she was right. There wasn't any kind of bumping into one another at work. Also, of course, when we're not in person, we can't pick up those nonverbal cues that you can when you are, with somebody. So, and I think, body language and gestures and facial expressions, they account for so much of the way that we communicate with one another. So when you don't see that, that's why often, important things, best not to put them in email or text, especially if they're sensitive, of really trying to have that conversation. So something that I really learned. So now that colleague and I have a weekly one-on-one set every Thursday morning, and it works great. We haven't had any issues come up since. So, in addition to these spontaneous things that happened before, we also aren't getting the brainstorming time with our colleagues, or the breaks in the afternoon, or the morning, whenever you would do that, and kind of, at least I know for me, wander around and find somebody to talk to. And while it was, we might think it before that it was kind of a waste of time, now I've come to see that those breaks really helped me be creative and productive when I got back to my desk. And we don't have that as much. So what we have done is taken advantage of many of these online networking opportunities, which is what I had mentioned about these Friday morning conversations. And many organizations are doing these now, and I'm so happy to see them. These are the coffee hours and cocktail hours and different, lunch and learns, where again, they're giving a forum to be a structure for us to interact with one another and talk about our work. I think the other part of all of this is that we've seen that collaborations have been key. And this is a time of unprecedented partnerships. Going back to this Friday, meeting again, collaborating with these two organizations we had not done before COVID. And they were friendly organizations, and we would kind of work with them, here and there. But we've been so much more deliberate about creating partnerships that can benefit all of the organizations. I've seen this, and others have reported too, that this has been a time when we've really been able to shed some of this competitive energy, really have a sense that there are enough resources, and by working together, not only can we magnify our impact, but also we can magnify the amount of resources coming to our organizations. Donors love collaboration. I don't know if you've ever seen some of these grant proposals like I have, where they want to ask, they have a question about who are your partners and how are you collaborating? And often it's the question of, sometimes it's easy to answer, and sometimes we're thinking, okay, we need to make this sound good. And any relationship, we want to put it in a context of, that this is pivotal for us. And that being true, during this time, we've really seen organizations work together like they never have before. They don't really have to stretch it to be thinking about what the partnerships might be. We've seen organizations that even aren't in the same realm working together. For instance, here in San Diego, we have a nonprofit, an after-school program that found last spring when the kids were not in school anymore, and that became an issue for kids, particularly with learning, but then also the students who would rely on food at school for the day, if they weren't getting their free and reduced breakfasts and lunches, although the school, I'll put it as an aside, the school districts have done a great job in pivoting and making that happen. This was kind of more in the beginning. So this after school program was thinking, well, great, we can still help kids with their classwork, and we'll do that virtually, we'll do some tutoring, but we have families that need groceries, and there's enough food, but the distribution to have that food get to the people that they need, I mean, that's always been, a big issue in that realm. So they started working together. And so another group, I didn't mention that one, another group is a produce organization. They glean produce from yards, and they work with different farmers in the area. They get extra produce, and they, in their regular time, they would either contribute that food to the charitable food system, or have it be at farmers markets, et cetera. Anyway, this program and the after school program joined forces and began working together so that the students and the families in the program were able to get bags of food a couple of times a week. Well, they've continued working even with some of the initial issues of the schools going back and having meals available. And this has just been an incredible impact. Well, what does that tell a donor? That is fantastic. Donors get very excited about that. And when we talk a little bit later about the case for support and how our cases for support changed, these are two examples with these organizations. They're still doing their core work. Their missions haven't changed, but the way that they're impacting the community has. And then there's other ways that they have found to, it doesn't necessarily have to be that, you bring your program to my program and let's share our direct service. But there have been some interesting things also happening in terms of co-authoring articles for some of the publications, some like, nonprofit Philanthropy Hub, Candid, a number of these organizations, they have their regular newsletters, and there's lots of opportunities to do sort of a letter to the editor and others. So, putting an article together is a great way to do that. We've also seen here in San Diego, this refocus of community education. So really talking about the issues of COVID, for instance. So food insecurity, I'll stay with the same theme, food insecurity during COVID. Educating the community, which we know is kind of the first step in fundraising, is making people understand what is the cause, what's the problem, and what are we going to do about it. So we've seen organizations join forces to be able to do these community education programs, and then as such be able to increase resources for both. Or more than two. And then the other is some very practical shared back office expenses. So even if you aren't aligned in other ways that could make programming helpful, or that could make a collaboration helpful, could there be any ways that you don't both have to purchase as many materials or toilet paper or equipment or whatever, particularly for small nonprofits. So anyway, these things have really come to light, and they've been really interesting to see. So now we would like to hear any stories or questions. If you could put in the chat, actually I'll turn it over to Christine to share about how we would love to hear from you.
Yes, just as Sharyn mentioned, please share any questions or any collaborating stories that you have from your own organizations. You can mention these in the chat or the Q&A, but we'd love to hear your stories and what you all have been doing during this past year, or I guess even more than that, as you mentioned, Sharyn. It's been a very
Right.
long time.
It has.
But I've also included a link to Fundraising Friday in the chat as well. If you all would like to, are interested in registering for this Friday, that is there. And they start at 9 a.m. Pacific time for those of you who are wanting to join. But yes, please feel free to add any questions in the chat. I know a lot of times during not only just Fundraising Fridays, but for myself anyway, I've learned that a lot of collaborations and connections are coming up that I never would have pursued before, or it's just come from joining a networking event and having that one side conversation in a breakout room of someone mentioning something that sparks an idea in your head. And I think if anything, I've learned how creative fundraisers are in this time. So we'd love to hear any more stories if you all have them. And again, please feel free to type in the chat. But I think for Fundraising Fridays, how many people usually attend, Sharyn? I believe it's a lot, right?
It is a lot. It's been really, it's been kind of a surprise because we started thinking, well, this will just be a few weeks and there's no way people are just going to come back week after week. But we've been at it since the middle of June, so almost a year, and have averaged about 45 people per call or meeting. So we've gone as high as about 80 right after New Year's. And I think that might have been, we were off for a couple of weeks because Christmas and New Year's Day both fell on Fridays, and so we didn't meet. And then when we started the new year, folks, I think we're excited to come back and talk. But it's been great. We also, during these calls, we share out the notes that we have. So we use the chat very robustly. And then any links to upcoming events, or we talk a lot about funding sources, and people can say, have you ever applied to this foundation? I don't know, they're not calling me back. And, so it's gotten, there's a very collegial, tone to it. And then, but it's also very tangible where we share out specifics, and there are some results, and actually talk about results. We've had organizations find funding that they wouldn't have otherwise because of the calls. We had a few folks get jobs through networking that they've done. A lot of these partnerships that I just mentioned, it's been interesting. So in addition to that sort of feel good, warm, fuzzy sense, there have been some real, as I said, tangible outcomes.
Thank you for sharing. And it actually looks like we have some questions that would apply to our second lesson. So maybe we can move to that.
Okay.
But this question was, what are tips for avoiding donor fatigue amid COVID? So I think lesson 2 kind of alludes to this a little bit.
Absolutely. Okay. So let me go back to that. Okay. So maintaining donor contact no matter what. I think we know that, there is no substitute for the steady, authentic relationships we have with our donors, and, connecting with our donors, relating to them personally. That's been a big difference during this time as well, that COVID has given us, I'll say, an extra opportunity, excuse, what have you, to relate a bit more personally with donors, asking how they are, how can you be of help to them? We are in this nonprofit world, all of us, and we have connections with a lot of agencies, a lot of nonprofits, folks in social service who are doing a whole bunch of different things and who could be of help to other donors, And so how can we add some of that expertise and provide value in addition to talking about, the work that we have. So that's been, I think, a bit of a change, and something that we could continue going forward. The use of the phone and talking, in person, online, I think it definitely has been different. And because we know too that, there's such the push in fundraising to have those in-person conversations, that without an in-person conversation, the likelihood of securing a gift really, really shrinks, and a meaningful gift. You might get something, and as this statistic shows, that 47% increased giving happens with that in-person conversation. So we all have had to really pivot and talk with donors if we could, using software, and so that we could see one another. And again, this has been the trick, as I was saying earlier, with not being able to see body language and facial expressions. You see them a little bit, but not like you would when you're together. So we've been employing a lot of these different things, and it's been the opportunity to really try to deepen our donor relationships. So because we may not be seeing donors when they come to a committee meeting at our office, bumping into somebody when they're on site for something else, there are fewer events happening. I found that fundraisers are asking, they're really trying to deepen those relationships in other ways by asking more directly and more consistently about donor backgrounds each and every time they talk to the donor, every conversation. And these questions, I think many of us are, we're used to these. These are things that are in all of the books. They are common sense to fundraisers, but I think that sort of revisiting these and having them at the ready, where you sort of are in putting your talking points together, developing your script for conversations, having some of these questions on hand so that you could be, getting more information, building that relationship, all the better, and then tracking that data in your donor database system, so that you can draw on it when you need to. There may be a hint that comes up through a conversation that you'll want to focus on. I love asking people about their families, their parents, their stories of, where they came, how they were immigrants to the US, which is interesting, or were they, so like sort of what is the story going back? That's often been very interesting. And it's also helped to provide some tips, hints to how, what kind of giving donors want to do and what might motivate them. And, so this is kind of the piece. The other question is that this advice question of, how could we do better? And, this one is it's a good one. It's also one that when you put this question out there, be ready, because you'll be told how you can do better. And, I would say, to focus this a bit of, how could we engage with our donors better? What would you like to see maybe on social media from us? Have you liked the communications that you've received? What other opportunities do you see happening at the other organizations that you might be involved with that we could learn from what they're doing? So, that I think has been very valuable as well. We did have the question come in the chat about donor fatigue when it comes to events and meetings. And, this is something that I've thought a lot about and spoken with folks a lot about. And I think it's there, but I guess the sense that I have is that we don't have much of a alternative, in a sense. And so we are going to talk about events and meetings, but just to get, really more to the question of, keeping meetings short, keeping events short. I went to a fabulous online event. It was an open house of an organization, and it was 45 minutes. I went to another for a clinic here, a health clinic, and it was a half hour. And when I saw that on the invitation, I thought it was a typo, but it wasn't. Basically, they, through having some pre-recorded information, that seems like that has been really a great trick for organizations to use, is to, if they're not pre-recording the entire program, but to pre-record pieces of it, particularly for some of your, if you have a CEO who could have a tendency to be long-winded, let's say, in person, that's endearing, but on online, not so much, or board chairs, or some of the comments from beneficiaries of your organization. So I think really anyway, this health clinic did a fabulous job, and they really were done in a half hour, even with music playing in the background. They had just very short snippets of information that they provided. They had a clear problem that they were sharing, a clear resolution to how this organization was addressing the problem, and how donors could be involved and participate in being part of the solution. And they were able to do it in a half hour. What that doesn't do, and we'll talk a bit when we get more to talking about events, is, there really wasn't the time for donor interaction. And donors really want to interact as much as fundraising professionals do. They're looking for that. Everybody is feeling a bit isolated. So it's a bit of a trade-off. But I think if you are looking at annual meetings or the galas, et cetera, I think it's really, keeping it short and sweet, and then doing some of your, the networking that you would do at an event afterwards, really having a clear follow-up plan, for donors, so that you can check in. What did they think about the program? Do they have any questions about the information that was shared? Really making the event not just be that standalone event, but it starts before it happens and then it goes afterwards. Those are some of the tips around donor fatigue, but I would love to hear through the chat any stories or questions, anything that you guys might want to share about donor contact over this past year.
Yes, so we have a couple comments. Someone just mentioned on donor fatigue that it's not just donor or supporter fatigue, there's also social media and email fatigue, which I totally agree. I am in that boat myself. And the same person mentioned that they are finding more response from personalized direct mail.
Very good point. Yeah, I think that is great. I think that sometimes we give direct mail a bit of a short shrift, where we think that's kind of the old way of communicating, but absolutely not. I think still research is saying that direct mail is still a very powerful way to engage donors. I think particularly when you're able to layer your communications so that somebody gets a direct mail piece, and then there's social media that goes to it as well, and then perhaps a conversation with a professional from the organization. So I think it's an interesting way for the story to really resonate with donors, but I agree 100%. There's also more time that donors have. I've seen that for sure, where people have been home. They've been available for the phone calls and the conversations, where it used to really be difficult to, weeks to get somebody. Now, it really hasn't been the case.
And then it looks like we also have a question a little bit more on how you mentioned tracking data and donor management. This person's question is, at what point or threshold do you recommend nonprofits transition to a donor management platform? When is it no longer manageable in, say, an Excel or a Google Drive?
I would say as soon as possible. It's been my experience. I don't have, reaching a particular size in mind. There might be others who would, and if you have this knowledge, we would love for you to put that in the chat or questions Q&A also. My sense is, as soon as you can even start a very basic CRM system, to do it, because it happens so quickly that by meeting people, one, even a small program that you might have, a CEO coffee, for instance, if you were to do that one morning and you have 7 or 8 people there, now here's data that you are starting to collect for 7 or 8 people. I think starting to build out donor profiles, and then you're able to report on it, faster, and then you're able to transition to more of an elaborate plan where you can, have your communications come out of your CRM system, and you can be, doing a lot of research and analysis to see, which donors you should be contacting, your internal prospecting. But that would be my advice. And there are some for sure that are not as expensive as others, that I don't have them off the top of my head, although yesterday we did a workshop where I am around donor platforms and CRM. And actually what we can do too, Christine, I'm happy to send you the information that we shared with folks. So Christine will share the notes for this and with the slides, and we can include that information too.
Definitely. A lot of people are sharing questions and stories, so this is great. Thank you for the engagement, everyone. Another question we have is someone is asking best practices to start conversations with donors when they're not responding to one-on-one outreach.
Got it. So they're not responding to one-on-one. I think often this is where I probably would suggest bringing in maybe somebody from the community, if there's a referral, somebody else who might know the donor, who could try to, find that way in. Maybe it's, if one-on-one doesn't seem to work, and there are donors for sure who, they're happy to give, but they also kind of want to be left alone. I'm good, I'll give you X. They're not the best for us as fundraisers because, we really want to be moving people through that, our moves management systems. But anyway, it sounds like this donor might fall into that category. So then I think what I would do is try to find events or programs like these coffees, that I mentioned a little bit ago. I have been really powerful. These sort of meet the CEO. I don't know if you all have seen those come around, but I've seen a number of organizations really have great success with those. And that way, hopefully, you're in. So this donor would be in a relatively small group. You could keep them small, we could also make them quite large, but with other donors, and maybe you have even a couple of, of your own volunteers or board members participate in that and try to engage a donor that way. I think the other thing to think about is that do they not want to have a one-on-one conversation because they feel like they're going to be put on the spot for a funding request. And so I think it's kind of like going back to like the fear of it, what's behind the fact that they don't want to have that interaction. So I think I would probably start with a small group. And I think the other would be, if you were to try to reach out again, to say there won't be a solicitation with this one-on-one meeting. I really want to share updates, information. We'll talk about this new case statement in a minute. And I would go that direction.
Yes, definitely. And it looks like we have just a couple things to share before we move on to lesson 3.
Great.
But someone mentioned, I recently donated to an organization that had not achieved its goal during its fundraising event. They sent me an email saying, we didn't achieve our goal, but if you give now, XYZ sponsor will match your gift. I saw that as such an opportunity since I hadn't given during the campaign. Even though the organization could have seen not meeting their goal as a failure, they used it constructively to motivate other donors to give. Very interesting approach. I agree.
Mm-hmm. I agree. That was a great idea. Thank you for sharing that.
And then two more things to share actually. Someone mentioned we are asking donors to move to landing page as personalized for them. And of course, following up by board members and following up with a telephone call. That's great.
Wow. Yeah. Fantastic.
And then one last note on donor database. 2 years ago, my board approved a donor database. I cannot say enough how important this tool was to my position. Our donations have tripled. So worth it.
Mhm.
Awesome. Thank you everyone for sharing.
Yeah, no, that's great. I do hear that a lot, that even though it can be a chunk of funds to make that investment, that it pays off pretty quickly. So great. Okay, so our lesson number 3 is that the missions of our work organizations really didn't change, but likely the case of support did. So this is what I had started to talk about a little bit earlier in talking about the different partnerships that happened. So I think really most organizations have had some tweak in what they have done over the past year. If you haven't, that's fine. I mean, this is just another thing to think about. It doesn't say you have to have had a change, but there's a sense of the cases for support that we're seeing now where they really are reflecting, as the first point shares, of a greater relevance and urgency for the work. You know, you're there to serve a particular purpose, and you're there to help in a variety of ways. That what have you done that has been innovative or experimental? This has also been a time when I think we've given ourselves, as we should probably in all times, the freedom to try some new things. You know, it's kind of one of those times, especially with this, you know, these virtual platforms where, you know, if I go to a meeting, it's now a joke that if there's a time during that meeting where one person is not on mute, when they start talking, then that's different because there's always somebody on mute. And you know, in better times, you know, we would have, I think, been more anxious about our technology. But now I think, you know, we're giving ourselves a lot more leniency and giving ourselves a break, you know, essentially. But, you know, really thinking like, why is your organization needed and why now? You know, what has been special about this past year that you've been able to step up and, you know, and fill a need? You know, have there been new priorities? Or, you know, if you're a basic needs organization and you know, provide food and housing, emergency assistance, you know, help with rent, utilities, things like that. What has happened during this year that has made your work all the more critical, and why? And, you know, how are you relating to some of the government support that has come out? You know, that's a question I'm hearing a lot from donors, particularly now with the new stimulus package coming out, and you know, the millions and billions of dollars that are going to all of our communities. I think it's really pointing out, you know, what are you doing with the opportunity that you receive that funds, and then what does the funding not help you with? So, I mean, I was on a call with some CEOs of our local area here, and they said, you know, so first, we're not really sure how the stimulus funding is going to be of help to us. And number two, what we know so far is that it will fit some of these direct needs that we have, such as going specifically to rent, but it's not going to pay for the staff time or the finance and accounting time, you know, to be able to process these awards. So I hope that can be addressed, because that's really difficult. We all know, you know, getting that support for the operating is sorely needed. But that's where the case for support to a donor could come up if you're in one of those organizations, sort of putting that, you know, down you know, down in writing of, we really want to be doing what we're doing, and we are, you know, we have some compelling things to share. Here's where we're seeing the gaps right now, and let your donors fill those gaps. And that last point, stories, for sure. You know, we know stories are so powerful. You know, how have you helped specific people? Talk a donor through a story of how somebody has been helped through your organization. And you know, as fundraisers, that can be tricky because we're not the ones doing the direct service, but having regular calls or meetings with some of your program staff, having those stories come to you on a regular basis. I had started doing something with an organization where I was working where, every Friday while it was fresh, having a check-in with the program staff, going to their regular meeting and asking what stories that they could tell me about people, and just, noting those myself, so that when I had them, for a communication, sure, absolutely, that's important. But I wanted to be able to tell donors, so here's what happens when a child comes to the program after school, first this, then this, and it really helped quite a bit. So, so basically, anyway, that's kind of the gist of this. I would love to hear any of your stories or thoughts about how your case for support might have changed over this year.
Yes, please share maybe how it's changed since the beginning of the pandemic until now, because I know that has changed a lot for a lot of people. We did have someone put a little comment after what you mentioned, Sharyn, about sharing stories. Facts tell, stories sell.
Absolutely.
Very clever.
I love that. Yes, I think I had seen that also. That is great. Where, yeah, the stories bring it to life, and I think I've seen donors, their eyes light up when I'm telling them. I'll give you an example, as we're talking. So I work with a nonprofit community farm. It's a farm that our foundation actually incubated, and it's its own 501c3. So they're kind of off now doing their own thing. We started this probably about 8 or so years ago. And the farm has on site a pay what you can farm stand. So that means that people, when they come up, and it's an organic farm, and it's beautiful produce, and like what you would see at a Whole Foods or Sprouts or something like that. So people pick whatever they want to purchase. They take it up to the front of the as they're getting ready to pay. And when they're up there, they don't. Nobody tells them, oh, that'll be $18. Nobody exchanges that information. They just say, what you owe is on the iPad right in front of you. And so that preserves, dignity. It makes it so that somebody, nobody around kind of knows my business. And then, so there's not a mention of the specific amount, and they say, please pay what you can by using the iPad. Now, this farm stand also accepts the food stamp cards, the CalFresh, food stamp cards. So it's one of those when so CalFresh in California is food stamp. So farmers markets and different farm stands around could apply starting a few years ago. So the farm did that. So somebody could use their CalFresh food stamp card, which looks like a credit card, and nobody knows the difference. It's different from when I was young. I'll date myself. There really were food stamps. They were stamps that were in books, and it was horrible because somebody didn't have the dignity of being able to share that. So this farm stand is fantastic. It it preserves dignity. It makes people feel like they deserve the access to good, healthy food, just like anybody else would. And it serves people in need. And then it also serves everybody. So general community members, and nobody knows who is there. Now the farm stand needs charitable support because people pay what they can, and they're not paying the full amount of the cost for doing business. That's where we need philanthropic support. We really would love you to come in and join us, partner with us to make up that difference. Not only are you providing food for people who need it, but you're providing food the right way. Okay, so there's a story, and so that one actually doesn't involve a particular person, but it kind of involves like, how did the program come to be? What's the need? And oh, you know what I didn't do though, which is kind of silly, is I didn't say, which I meant in the beginning, that over COVID, the farm stand has been busier than ever. And particularly to that distribution issue that I mentioned earlier, that, you know, people haven't been able to, didn't have access to food like they did prior. I mean, that also is being worked out now, but the farm had this opportunity to kind of step up and fill a need, for particular populations. Like here in North San Diego, we have a lot of military, you know, young active military families. They do not get a cost of living allowance that lets them live comfortably without even like the non-military spouse having another job or two. And so that's a population that really had been benefited. So anyway, so there's a story, but, and forgive me for not starting with COVID. So.
Thank you for so much. And I agree with both you and the person who shared. I think stories and just being able to visualize something, I think helps everyone, no matter how they kind of think. I know some donors prefer the numbers and the data, but the story still is able to paint that picture. So I think that's a great tip for everyone, in case you haven't already, to kind of weave in those stories to your asks and your causes. But
yeah, and another thought too is I've seen some really terrific virtual site visits to organizations. We have one here, a big social service organization, and very early they were saying, gosh, we really want to show you what's going on here. We have so many people, the lines of people needing help for XYZ are long. And so very early on, the CEO was walking around with his own phone, kind of doing a like walk with me, talk with me. And it wasn't, excuse me, beautiful or like a very polished, but that was okay because people were able to really connect and see kind of their case for support really while it was happening and at a time when it wasn't safe for them to go and visit. I mean, I think many of us have had, you know, how much time have we all spent trying to get a donor to do a site visit? It's hard, you know, just like getting them to do a meeting, but getting them to do a site visit, you know, all the more because you're not, you know, they have to come to you to do that. You know, you can't go to their office and make it as convenient as you would with a visit. So, you know, these video site visits, I think have been great. And to like then put them on your website, you know, send a link to donors. You know, they don't want to talk with you. That's okay. Can you watch this video? It's like a minute. Again, keeping everything really short. So it looks like we have one.
Yes, someone was very nice to share the donor management system that they are using.
Wonderful.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Lindsay. And if others have some recommendations, please share them with each other. That'd be very helpful.
Great, super. Okay, so let's continue on to lesson 4. So we've touched on this a bit already, but you know, I think by now many of us our technological skills are at a place we never thought they would be. I know for me, absolutely, because that's usually where I am a bit hampered, but we have, I think, surprised ourselves. You know, virtual meetings and events can be productive and they're here to stay. I told you earlier about the donor who said that, you know, they weren't going to drive anymore a couple of hours for an audit meeting. So I would not at all be surprised if we see these, you know, if we see a mix of things. In fact, even the donor who, you know, when you try to get the virtual meeting and they say, oh, couldn't we just have a phone call instead? And that used to be something that we would, I don't know, I think we were more reluctant, you know, to do that. You know, I know I was, you know, would often respond with, well, you know, the good news is that a phone call wouldn't really take as much, more time than an in-person meeting, you know, that, you know, so give me this in-person time. And, you know, that's still very important. But I think now with all that we've been doing with virtual meetings, it helps, you know, it helps a lot in engaging those people who were just not going to be easily engaged. So some of these tips, and I'm sure you all may have some to add to this, but make it really easy for your donors to join you. A very, click a button and they join, with a browser based platform. Make sure that your headset, your microphone is good. You have quality lighting. You're in a professional setting. You don't have distractions. I think many of us at this point kind of have a lot of this down. And then a lot of what we did before of, practicing and being really ready. But because we don't have, again, that benefit of seeing somebody's body language or in-person, facial expressions, we have to be a lot more deliberate in the information that they might get ahead of time and the follow-up. So while it's great practice to send an agenda ahead of time anyway, sometimes it really does seem like overkill when you have some of your donor meetings, especially if you're on more of an informal basis with a donor. And you don't want to, you'll know intuitively if it seems like it makes sense. But I've started to do this with meetings, even if it doesn't look like a big formal agenda, of just, by email saying, here are the couple things that I would love to cover. It helps the other person and helps you kind of track the conversation. Where are we and where are we going? There's a plan here. Also, really inviting their participation and questions. And as I mentioned earlier, having this time be, no more than 45 minutes, I think I would take that down a bit and keep it short. Again, to that very good point from earlier about donor fatigue. This is a fun slide. Maybe you guys have seen this, but this really took me back a bit when I first saw it, of what we look like on the camera to others when we're on these virtual meetings. And so you'll see, you have the first one on the left of you're smiling, engaged, you're looking at the donor, that's all great. And then we have sort of that shift where you're looking at yourself. And that one really got me because I thought, oh my goodness, I do that sometimes, I have to make sure, my bangs aren't falling or whatever, but to take, to kind of be conscious of that. Somebody walked in the room and you become more distracted. Now on the bottom, you're starting to do other work, opening a website, you're not engaged. So kind of, and of course that last one with the cat walking across, that, sort of, that is obvious. But I think what this one tells me is that, at least for me, I might not be hiding it as well as I think I am. So really to be focused on engaging, doing my best to be smiling, having eye contact, sounding enthusiastic, all of the things that you really have in mind for your in-person meetings, to be sure that you're doing the same when you're on, Zoom or what have you. And even when you're on the phone, we talk a lot about people can hear a smile in your voice. There's research to prove that when you're enthusiastic, when you sound like you have energy. There's a tip of standing up when you're on the phone with a donor, walking around, or at least if not walking around, standing up, because your energy increases, you're able to breathe better and, you sound like you're, kind of more in motion. And then the other person picks this up. They are also able to, usually, it's contagious. It brings their energy. The smile makes them happy, and there you go. So there are some thoughts with this. So now moving on from meetings to events, we're looking at these events, and again, I can't wait to hear some of your comments because I'm sure you have great stuff here, but there has been research of what do donors want in events? So this actually comes before COVID, research about, when we have people come to our events, what are the priorities that they have? And I think keeping focus on those priorities is really valuable, even in these virtual settings. So number one, they want connections. They want connections to staff, to volunteers to donors. They want to see your clients or hear from your clients. I know that for some organizations, it's harder or easier to do than others, for confidentiality reasons. And I think too, that's where some of these video, the video idea can be very helpful. But some kind of a time where they could connect. Or I have seen when there was one gala that I had gone to, I'm trying to go to a lot of these so that I have examples to share and I'm learning, is that they had a specific program for their gala, and it was about 45 minutes, and much of it was videotaped, and then there were messages and people could communicate during the chat, kind of like we're doing in this workshop today, and that was great. And they did get a kick out of that and were able to say hello to one another. And then afterwards, they had like the after party idea, which not everybody stayed on, but they had a core of folks who did. And that was a time just to connect and talk. And they had a facilitated conversation by the CEO. So it was a way to meet this need, even if donors didn't take advantage of it, the opportunity was there. Having this having the event at a convenient time, which has been interesting during COVID, because with folks home so much, what is the convenient time? I did ask this Friday morning group, we talked about it a couple times, and it seems that Thursday evenings have been popular for events, and Sundays, Sunday afternoon, Sunday early evening, where people would be available, and it seemed like a good opportunity to connect. Of course, feeling valued and how the gift was used. So, that goes back to a little of what we mentioned earlier of like, so what happened as a result of the work that you did, and what happened with the money that I gave? Did it just kind of go into the, black hole? I mean, people kind of, when they don't have information, you might think the worst. So if you don't know, then, you're really at a disadvantage. So I think being really specific of here's what your dollars did, and here's what we were able to do with the funding that you provided, being really specific, for sure. This I think is really interesting, giving them what they want. So in terms of the connections and feeling good about the experience, this was interesting, this, acknowledging every donor's presence. So having a staff person or a volunteer welcome donors as they join a virtual event, so hi, Sharyn, we're happy that you're able to be with us today. And here's Bill, and he's joining us, and here, And so they, it's not like I'm anonymous, which is kind of the fear with, I think, some of these virtual events. Now this gets tricky when you have a big event going on, and, how do you track that? And so maybe you don't do it as people join. Maybe they're being acknowledged during the event. I've also had organizations do that, where they see that I'm on, and then in direct chat, they'll say, we're so happy that you're here today. Be sure to let us know if you have any questions. Even before the event happens, just like you might do a gala where you might, or often, assign staff different donors to be sure that they, connect with during an evening, for instance. Do the same thing for a donor event, give everybody on your team, including volunteers, that's fine, an assignment. You see who's responded and who's coming. Now, they might not all come. We do know through events that we have, these drop-off rates, that's okay. But have them, really connect and engage with the donor during the event through the chat. And that is something that can be very helpful, making it as personable as possible before, during, and after. And that's kind of what I mentioned earlier of not to have the event be just that standalone, but have some engagement happening before the event, during, and after. This program that I went to that had served the elderly, did a very interesting thing when it came to the auction. The auction started the evening of the event and then lasted for a full week. And then during the week, the organization added a couple of items so that if you were registered to participate in the auction, you were reminded about it. And there were a few new things. So it was exciting. And they built this momentum and energy through the week. I didn't realize this at first, because when I first went on, and I saw that I was the leading bid on the things that I wanted, I was really excited because I thought, oh, wow, I'm going to do so well here. But it lasted for a week and it really did keep it fun, and it kept it on my mind. With each reminder, they also had a line or two about the value of the organization. And then afterwards, when the items were delivered, because folks weren't able to go to the office and pick them up, there was, a great engagement from a volunteer who called and said, I'm going to drop this off. I'll be in your area Friday morning. Does that work? And then, waving from, the car, et cetera. Anyway, there's just a lot that you can do. I was really taken with that. And really, again, being clear that with the messaging that you're sharing, particularly around the case for support that you have going on right now. So essentially, I probably should change that last bullet, because it's not as much when donors log off the event as, by the end of the experience, like I would say for that program for the elderly, I'm so glad that I joined that, because I learned a lot through that experience, and I was able to pick up some best practices along the way too. I'm really, it was important that I was there. These are just some fun examples of all of the virtual things that have happened, the coffees, the food drives, the, out and out galas, the walks and reading and film festivals. I'm sure that you all have tried, this and more. And if you want to, in the chat, which we're going to come up to that in a minute, of any of the fun things that you've done that have worked really well, or things that maybe you probably may not do again. We would love to hear about that. And there we are. So in addition to sort of the what worked well, what didn't, any stories that you might want to share with us, I think also it's interesting that, having these virtual events changed our, business plans. It changed the costs of events. It changed the revenues that we were bringing in. I know in the very beginning, of course, it was really scary, because if we didn't have a gala, then would we be able to replace, the revenue that had come in from the gala? And what we've seen in these, again, going back to this Friday meeting, that there have been some of these eliminated programs or replaced that, to be honest, they weren't really missed. They really, the organizations were able to come up with other things where they saved some money, and they actually made more money, maybe with a few smaller events, like I was saying, these, CEO coffees and things like that, where that made up the difference from these large events. And a few were wondering, do we really need to go back and do something like that again? For those of you in the event side of our work, they take up so much of your time and energy and resources, and sure, they're great, but this time has given us a chance to look at some of that a little differently. So along these lines, we would love to hear what's gone well, not, and then any of these points that have come up about the business side of things.
Yes, let's see what we have. One person did mention that they loved the Zoom slide. I know it was one of my favorites when I first saw that slide. I had wished I had seen it so much earlier, so I agree, that's my favorite slide. Let's see, someone has a question, it looks like. Do you have suggestions on how to combine in-person events and still make them available virtually? That's interesting. For instance, right now we are looking at a camera or the computer, but in-person interactions may be different. Have you seen events that combine both, and have they been successful?
I started to see these, actually, to be honest, have just started to see invitations for these. So I wish I could give you some specifics around that. But I did see one, actually, I think it was a golf tournament where you were, obviously, if you don't go, you can't play golf, but you could participate virtually by, I think it was, hearing some of the comments from, the board chair and the CEO, and participating in the auction. And there were a few other things there. For somebody like me, honestly, I don't play golf. And so there, and where I might have just kind of clicked through something like that in the past, now I'm thinking, well, maybe I actually could go and, the virtual side of things. So unfortunately, that's the best that I can share right now. But I think as we're seeing that these are going to be happening more and more, we're happy to share as they come up.
I've heard of a couple. I've heard of one where the kickoff events were virtual.
Oh.
And for in-person, it's obviously more recently now, but they had staggered the arrivals of the attendees. So that is also to maintain social distancing and keep everyone safe, but they had the bigger announcements and presentations virtually, and then the in-person activities were done in a staggered way. So that was one that I heard of that I thought was really interesting. Another really good question is, do you have a suggestion on how to keep presenters running on schedule and not going over their time at virtual events when you have multiple speakers?
Yeah, that's so hard, isn't it? Because you're right, you're not there to kick them or anything. It's really tricky. I think, if you're not going to videotape, which I understand, that can, there are pros and cons to that. It definitely keeps them in time because you can, have control over the length of the tape. I think otherwise, I would really try to script anybody who's going to talk more than I would have naturally, done that. Where even, scripting them, ahead of time, drafting the script for them, or if that doesn't feel comfortable, having them draft it, but telling them, with time constraints. And you can really say, we need to keep this event to no more than 45 minutes or whatever, your plan is, because, we're here, because Zoom fatigue is a real thing. And we need to, make sure that we're hitting all of these different things, kind of bring them into the problem, to helping you solve the problem, rather than having them be part of the problem, I guess. And I think I probably would also be more deliberate with practicing with them and timing them, which is a lot easier now than trying to get somebody to come to you, from work during the day or something like that. If you can arrange a virtual meeting to kind of take care of that, so that they don't go on and on. But I'll be honest, I think the best that I've seen for organizations that have really had issues with that is they've taped them ahead of time.
I agree with that as well. The pre-recorded it works, and also it helps with those presenters that are very busy and may not be able to attend, so you can still have them present. So
that's right. That's a good point.
All right, last lesson. And I know we're running out of time, so thank you everyone.
Lesson.
Thank you everyone for your engagement.
Yeah, this has been so fun. So this one is getting educated on planned giving. So, as I said in the very beginning, planned giving is having a moment that unfortunately the moment came from not great, from sadness and from fear. But it is having a moment. So, COVID-19 has really prompted donors to contemplate their legacies. Estate planning attorneys have seen a real jump in the number of wills created or updated. Some donors have increased the size of their planned gifts, or they've fulfilled the obligations early. And communications for planned giving has, those have gotten response rates that they really hadn't before now. So, in the next 20 years, and I'm sure many of you have seen similar demographics, going to be, trillions of dollars passed from the baby boomers to this next generation. And so given what's gone on with COVID and with this shift in generational wealth, the advice is really to revisit having your plan giving program, that you don't necessarily have to have it be a big, it doesn't have to be a big program. You don't have to have attorneys on staff to be able to do that. You can get some very basic language. Even I have a colleague who is a plan giving expert, and she even finds that if staff put at the bottom of their email address, or your signature line, ask us about our plan giving program, or things like that, people are they will do it. The other is to know that you also have resources in your local community foundations to help with plan gifts, and they do have attorneys on staff, and they have help that could be provided. So that's something as well. But just to really kind of keep that in mind, and also going back to if a donor doesn't, they're not able to give now. I mean, that's a lot of where these plan giving conversations go. That could be a good conversation for the future. So that, I think, yeah, that takes us through lesson 5. I know lesson 5 was pretty quick, but it was just one of those, let us know, keep posted on something else that we had seen. But if you have any stories or questions for that, happy to hear those too.
I know plan giving is not something that every organization has in their repertoire. So this is definitely something that if you all would like to look into a little bit more, Sharyn's information is also on the screen, and you can also look into other webinars that go into plan giving and maybe look into it some more, because I know not everyone has heard about plan giving as well.
Right. In fact, what I'll do also is I'll share some resources for plan giving as well with Christine. And so when you get these slides and the link, etc., there are a few, particularly some good websites, the Plan Giving Council and a few others that really do have some, specifics of how do you get started. And I agree entirely with Christine. Keep an eye out for workshops that are how do you get started with plan giving, because I know for me, it is an area of the work that I haven't done as much on as others, and it can be intimidating for sure, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. Okay, I think, all right, so the end quote that I have, and then we'll engage any other questions or thoughts that anybody has, is this quote from John Lennon that I've liked for a long time, that just reminding ourselves everything really is going to be okay in the end. And if it's not okay, it's not the end. The story's not over yet. And this has been really challenging work. I applaud you all, because many professions have had a tough time during COVID, but fundraisers really have worked very hard, and the organizations that you're supporting, we're all in this business, business really to be making the world a better place. And yeah, I just encourage you to, find the connections that you can, get the support that you can, and take heart, because it'll get better. So I think I turn it back over to Christine.
Yes, thank you, Sharyn. So thank you everyone so much for your engagement and sharing your stories. We still have a little time for Q&A left at the end, so we'd love for you all to stay on and ask your questions. I just want to give a little bit of last minute things. So as you're typing up those questions, friendly reminder that again, the slide deck and the resources that Sharyn mentioned, as well as this recording, will be sent in probably next week and the following days, so you can review them at your leisure. All of our upcoming live webinars and a full list of these on-demand videos are listed on our website, so you can check them out there. And don't miss our next webinar, which will be on May 19th, What to Ask and When to Ask It with Tim Hogan with Road Trip Nation. So we'd love for you to join us again next week to talk about donor conversations and questions you can ask your donors as well. But we'd love to go into some questions that you all might have. And please put them into either the chat or the Q&A. We'd love to hear from you all. And here is as well Sharyn's information if you'd all like to. You can write this down now, but again, you'll receive this information later.
Right. You're welcome to contact me. I'm happy to hear from you if you have questions.
Thank you so much, Sharyn. Let's see what we have. We have some people saying thank you to you, Sharyn, that this was a great training. Thank you for joining us.
You're welcome.
Let's see. Oh, someone else did mention thank you on behalf of Fundraising Academy. Fundraising Academy has an excellent webinar on plan giving with the plan giving officer from the University of San Diego. Yes, Aaron Jones presented for us, I believe, a year ago. So that is, I am biased, but I do believe that that was a good webinar. So you can check that out for more on plan giving. And then there's just more thank yous and great works in the Q&A from everyone. But yes, thank you everyone so much for your engagement and sharing your stories and asking questions. This was a very diverse crowd of experience levels. So thank you everyone for joining us. We really appreciate it. Yeah, if you have any questions, please feel free to ask them now. If you'd like as well, you can raise your hand and I can unmute you if you can't type it out. I'm happy to unmute you as well if needed. But again, thank you for spending your day with us, everyone. We appreciate it so much. Just lots of thank yous coming in, so thank you everyone.
Great.
And thank you everyone also for sharing those resources on donor management and donor databases. I don't have a lot of recommendations, so thank you to those who did have those recommendations. Those are listed. I think it was Auxilia and Salesforce, which I've heard a lot about. I've also heard a lot about Salsa recently. I'm not really quite familiar with that, but that has been shared as well. But great. And also, before we close up, oh, someone else mentioned Bloomerang as well as a donor management system. Great. Well, before we wrap up, another thing is just, again, thank you to our audience for your time and participation and to help us continue to improve our monthly webinar series and ensure we are providing value to our audience. Please take a few minutes to complete our survey, which will appear on your screen at the end of the webinar. I think we can close out a little early because I think we answered all their questions very early, Sharyn. So very productive in that way.
There you go. So great.
So we just hope that you all are safe and healthy, and please enjoy the rest of your day. And thank you for all that you do to better the communities in which we work and play.
Thank you so much. Take care.
Thank you, everyone.